Hello, welcome to FHE on the Road with Christine Stevenson. This podcast is designed to connect the people and the places from the past with your lives today, with 5-minute stories and facts from church history. Save these stories for when you are traveling through these areas to bring history to life. Okay, welcome back to FHE on the Road with Christine. Today I am telling one of my most favorite stories in church history. I have loved and been fascinated by this story since I heard it all those years ago. And I do think it is one of those stories that we used to hear a long time ago, and it is not repeated today. And it is so incredible. And so hopefully you love this story as much as I do. It is so mind-boggling. I think it's so incredible. So this story is the Transfiguration of Brigham Young into Joseph Smith after the death of Joseph Smith. And it is incredible. There is literally no explanation for this story other than that it was a miracle of our Heavenly Father to his saints at the time. And I love that our Heavenly Father gives us these incredible miracles to know that he is in charge, that he knows us and he's willing to help us through incredibly difficult challenges. The word transfiguration means a change of form or appearance. The transfiguration of Brigham Young to Joseph Smith was the miracle the saints were looking for to know the will of God. It was such a messy time. Right after the death of Joseph Smith, it was so chaotic. And they talk about this in the movie that came out not too long ago, 6 Days in August. If you haven't seen that movie, I'll link it. It's so good. But in that movie, I didn't feel like they did justice to this scene because it's incredible. It is so incredible. I can't believe that Brigham Young looked like Joseph Smith. Before the Transfiguration, they looked nothing alike. They were very distinctly different. It wasn't like, oh, you could be twins. No, it wasn't like that for Brigham and Joseph Smith. And the fact that when Brigham Young got up to speak, he looked like Joseph Smith. It's so incredible. So the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were searching to know who should be the new prophet of the church. And remember, all of these people were all new converts, all of them. The church had not been around for very long, and it was a really, really difficult situation. There had been no other prophets other than Joseph Smith in this restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ on earth. So they didn't know what they were supposed to do. All these random people started coming out of the woodwork, and it just confused more and more people. So the Lord answered the prayers of the saints in such a big way when the members were able to witness with their own eyes the transfiguration of the senior apostle Brigham Young. The members of the church were in total confusion at the death of the prophet, not knowing who to believe, and this miraculous transfiguration of Brigham Young solidified to the saints who the next prophet should be, and that they could put their trust in the Quorum of the 12 apostles. They didn't know, and this is why we put our trust in the Quorum of the 12 apostles today. Our Heavenly Father has shown us over and over again that he calls stalwart and worthy men to lead the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And our Heavenly Father is in charge of who will become the next prophet. And this is where it all began. This is where we learned those principles. So the death of Joseph Smith came as an extreme shock to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And like I said before, chaos ensued. Many people sprang up to say they had been appointed to take the prophet's place as a leader of the church. And many members didn't know who to believe and what God wanted for his church. When Brigham Young arose to speak to a large group of saints, it was made clear who the Lord wanted to lead his church. The saints learned that the Lord wanted the senior apostle of the Quorum of the 12 apostles to be the next leader and the next prophet of his church. At the time of the death of Joseph Smith, the senior member of the Quorum of the 12 apostles was Brigham Young. God answered the prayers of the faithful saints with this miraculous vision of Brigham Young looking and sounding exactly like the prophet Joseph Smith. So let's give you some background of what happened. Brigham Young was in Petersboro, New Hampshire, when there began to be rumors of the death of the prophet. So Brigham Young started hearing rumors that Joseph Smith had been killed. And soon after, a letter arrived confirming the tragic news of the death of his dear friend and prophet. Brigham Young responded right away and walked from Petersboro, New Hampshire to Boston. And in Boston, he met with Wilford Woodruff, who had also recently heard of the deaths of Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith. Brigham and Wilford went to the home of a member in Boston, and they went upstairs and sat down and cried together. It was a very emotional time for the two members of the Quorum of the 12, mourning their friends and worrying about what is to come next for the church. One of the daughters of Brigham Young said she never saw Brigham Young's face so sorrowed as when the word came of Joseph and Hiram. In that very setting, Brigham Young said, quote, "Where are the keys of the priesthood?" Then he brought his hands to his knees and said, "They are right here." End of quote. He knew that the Quorum of the 12 were given the keys to keep the church running with the correct authority from our Heavenly Father. It would have been such an incredibly challenging time, so much confusion. Even now, it doesn't quite make sense why Joseph Smith was murdered the way he was. There was just so much happening and so much contention and so many people wanting to be the prophet after the prophet Joseph Smith. It would have been so hard. And so I love that our Heavenly Father had Brigham Young prepared for this calling. Brigham Young was so strong. Brigham Young was prepared to take on this calling after the death of Joseph Smith, and Heavenly Father had prepared him for this. So Brigham and Wilford returned to the chaos and confusion of Nauvoo. The members of the church gathered together looking for direction and guidance on who would be the next leader. It would be so confusing. In this famous meeting, Sidney Rigdon spoke for nearly 2 hours. He was arguing that, quote, he and he alone is the heir of the church, end of quote. And Sidney was to function as the, quote, guardian of the church. 2 hours. The saints sat out there for 2 hours listening to Sidney. And then Sidney finished and the next man rose. His name was James Strang. And James Strang told the people that he'd received a revelation from a letter of Joseph had written. James produced the letter with the signatures of Joseph Smith. He believed this letter was proof that he should be the next leader of the church. Can you imagine being a new member of the church and hearing this? It would have been so hard. And I love that our Heavenly Father knew exactly what his children needed to hear and to see, to know who the next leader of the church should be. So after James Strang was done, it was Brigham Young's turn to address the saints. Brigham stood and spoke for less than 20 minutes, and he said that he didn't care who leads the church, but it was most important to know who the Lord wanted to lead the church. He said, quote, I testify to you that the head of the church right here at this moment is the council of the 12, and no one can get between the council of the 12 and the Lord himself, end of quote. Brigham Young bore a simple and powerful witness of the importance of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He said, quote, I do not care who leads the church, but one thing I must know is what God says about it. I have the keys and the means of obtaining the mind of God on this subject, end of quote. And then another quote he says, quote, Joseph conferred upon our heads, referring to the Quorum of the 12, all the keys and the powers belonging to the apostleship, which he himself held before he was taken away, end of quote. And then another quote says, how often has Joseph said to the 12, I have laid the foundation and you must build thereon, and upon your shoulders the kingdom rests, end of quote. I love that even the Quorum of the 12 Apostles were like, we've never been in this situation either. We have no idea what we're supposed to do here. They knew that the Lord had given them the keys of his church, and they knew that they had access to our Heavenly Father's power, and they knew that they could go to him to solve this problem. But they really truly didn't know what the next step was. I love the humility of Brigham Young in this. He's like, I don't know. And he says, I don't care who's supposed to lead the church, but I do care what God thinks. I love the quote where it says, I testify to you that the head of the church is right here at this moment, the council of the 12. He's like, we can look to the council of the 12. We know that we have access to this power of God, and he will teach us and he will tell us. Anyways, I think it's pretty cool. Here is the most incredible part. I love it so much. So during this meeting in Nauvoo, there were more than 100 witnesses of men, women, and children that say they saw Joseph Smith speaking and not Brigham Young. So like we said before, Brigham Young did not normally look anything like Joseph Smith. He was stockier and 3 to 4 inches shorter than the prophet Joseph Smith. They did not sound the same normally either, with different voices and styles of speaking. But the members of the church witnessed Joseph Smith up there speaking to them after his death. Isn't that so crazy? Here are some of the accounts recorded. It says, so while Brigham Young was speaking, there were people who arose and shouted, quote, it is Joseph. There were children who tugged on their mother's skirt saying, Mother, look, Mother, end of quote. There were some who had been familiar with the slight whistle in the prophet Joseph Smith's speech because of a lost tooth, who said they could even hear that in Brigham Young's speech. A man named Benjamin F. Johnson recalled, he said, quote, President Brigham Young arose and spoke. I saw him arise, but as soon as he spoke, I jumped to my feet, for in the very possible degree, it was Joseph's voice and his person in look, attitude, dress, and appearance. It was Joseph himself personified, and I knew in that moment the spirit and mantle of Joseph was upon him. End of quote. William C. Staines described Brigham Young as speaking, quote, with the voice like the voice of the prophet Joseph. I thought it was he, and so did thousands who heard it, end of quote. Wilford Woodruff wrote, he said, quote, if I had not seen him with my own eyes, there is no one that could have convinced me that it was not Joseph Smith, and anyone can testify to this who is acquainted with these two men. End of quote. When it was put to vote, the majority voted yes that they sustain the 12 apostles with Brigham Young as their head. I keep thinking about this and how completely tragic it was for this community of saints to lose their prophet, Joseph Smith. They put so much trust in the prophet and how hard it was for him to pass away and the way he did. And it was so terrible. And then to have Brigham Young get up, this Brigham Young who is shorter and he doesn't sound the same and he doesn't look the same. And for him to look exactly like Joseph Smith and talk like him, it was just such a special blessing from our Heavenly Father for these struggling saints. They didn't know what to do and they didn't know who to believe. And to be able to see that prophet that they loved so dearly up there speaking in front of them after he had passed away, it is so incredible. And I love these huge miracles that our Heavenly Father gives us, and I love the small ones. And this one to me is just one of the biggest. How incredible that our Heavenly Father blessed these saints with this vision. Heavenly Father wanted them to have no doubt. Absolutely no doubt. It was like over 100 people saw it. There's so many accounts and they're all so incredible of them saying, no, it was Joseph Smith and it was after his death. It was impossible. It could not have been Joseph Smith, but we know that with our Heavenly Father, all things are possible. And what an incredible blessing it would have been to see that. But even just to have those accounts, to know that our Heavenly Father is capable of these incredibly miraculous experiences, that he guides and directs his church, and that he'll give us exactly what we need for it to continue on and to change the world. Anyways, I thought this story was so incredible. It's one of my absolute favorites, and hopefully you like it too. Thanks. Thank you for listening to FHE on the road today. We hope you enjoyed what you've heard. Please like, subscribe, and share with anyone who'd be interested in these stories. Thanks.